1974. The Drop-In with Dan Bardell.
Hello and welcome back to 1874. It's time for a special show today as I'm joined by the Athletics Aston Villa reporter Jacob Tanswell to get the inside scoop in Aston Villa's summer transfer window. That doesn't make any sense at all. On Aston Villa's summer transfer window, Jacob, obviously in his role, gets kind of a flavour of what goes on. We've got a timeline here looking back at basically what's been a frantic few months for Aston Villa Football Club. And hopefully Jacob's going to guide us in the right direction about what really happened in Aston Villa's summer transfer window. This show is sponsored by Luke Roper. And if you want to get 20% off everything Luke have to offer, then use the code TVV20 and you'll get 20% off. Why not treat yourself and get yourself some new gear? Jacob, how are you?
Doing really well, thank you. Yeah. Obviously, it's good win on the weekend. It's always easier to write a piece after that. But yeah, good. I'm selfishly quite happy about the international break. It's been a very busy time. So just to get some time away, as a journalist, you really start to appreciate international breaks, albeit it's an absolute pain for supporters at this time of year.
Yeah, very selfish of you to be celebrating the international break. It's just too early. You just start to get a little bit of rhythm going, 3 games in, and then you have a break for 2 weeks. I like international football. I find it like quite refreshing change to Premier League every now and again, and big supporter of England. Obviously, I like watching some of the other games as well. But just like the 3 games in the Premier League has only just started, so it's just annoying timing. Why can't it wait till like the end of September, for example?
Yeah, I agree. It's always this time of year as well. It's very stop-start. Everyone's jockeying for positions. No one really knows, who's in form, who's not in form. It does feel like, especially at the start of the season, it's very front-loaded, isn't it? The international fixtures not spread out. But I think for Emery, I don't think he minds that much. He can just settle down. He can take stock. He can plan what's going to happen for the next few weeks. And now he's obviously got his squad and he knows who's going to be here and who's not. I think it's not a bad time for him to reflect really and take a breather.
Yeah, Agent Cooper celebrating my shirts in the background. I've been a lot better at changing my shirts in the background before we do podcast. Today we've got 95, 96. In fact, it was 95 to 97. Savo Milosevic and Tommy Johnson vintage behind me. So thank you for noticing, Agent Cooper, because I am trying to make the effort to change them. 1,000 shirts, so there's no excuse really for not changing it on a week by week basis. And it was better times as well, as someone just said Agent Cooper said that. Take me back to 1996. Less stressful times in life being a child enjoying the football. As much as I'm enjoying Villa now, I enjoyed football more when I was a kid and I didn't have anything to worry about in general life, Jacob.
I can't really comment because I would have been -3 at that point.
Okay, Jacob. Completely unnecessary. Last week he turns up in cricket gear. This week he's been ageist against the host. So yeah, no need for that at all, Jacob. Right, what we're going to do today is then we're going to try and go through the transfer window. As I said at the start, Jacob is in quite a unique position in the way that he reports transfers, the people he talks to. He's going to have to cast his mind back quite far because it's not just a case of the summer. I'm sure Jacob's speaking to people about transfers whilst the season before was still going on. Is there any frustrations in your role around reporting transfers? Because when I work in transfers, I'm there to give an opinion, really. It's the proper journalists that are going out and finding the stories, finding out what's going on, then feeding it to us. And I just give my opinion on whether I think a transfer is good, where they're going to fit in, etc. But for you, it's obviously really, really different in the way that you have to do things. You want to just give people a little bit of an inside look into how that looks for you.
Yeah, obviously every outlet and publication is different, but how we have to report and how we get told religiously and how we follow our protocol is to double source, triple source everything and go through this process where if someone tells me something from one hand, I then need to source it from someone else who's not involved with that person. So it's it's a completely different side. Once I've managed to get a double source, I would then go to the communication departments of both clubs or whoever's involved and speak to them. And in that process where you're waiting for people, you're waiting to verify, corroborate information, it does take time. And even if you're iron cast with some information, I'll give you an example, the Gertruda bit a couple of days ago. I got told this by a really senior source, and I think majority of people would probably put that out there because they're thinking this is first-hand information. But the way our processes work is that we've then got to go to find another source involved with Gertruda, and then we've got to go to the communications department at Aston Villa at Feyenoord and ask if they want to clarify, if they want to comment, if I've got anything wrong, if I've got something wrong in the stick, and all that takes time. So there is a frustration maybe when someone else breaks it first and they don't have to go through this diligence. But for us, I'm not too fast, because I think we've learned that when we do put something out, might not always be first, but it's better to be second and right than first and wrong. So with Villa this season, or this summer, sorry, with the amount of transfers, incomings, outgoings, PSR, and everything that's been the reporting around it, it's been difficult. I've not really had a break, and like I said, I've not been on holiday or anything, so it feels like it's just been one long stretch. But yeah, I really enjoy it, and it's kept me interested, and there's always something to talk about.
Interestingly, Sky's the same. I don't know whether it's always been that way, but Sky do the same in terms of double sourcing. I know TalkSport works slightly different. I think if someone gets fed information from a good source in TalkSport, I think TalkSport just go out and say TalkSport work differently to other companies that I've worked for. But I absolutely love it there. It's like a proper fun, good place, cool place to TalkSport. So I asked about like frustrations. So I guess because you're talking to agents may not always tell the truth. I know there was a particularly complicated transfer deal this summer, a lot of misinformation going around, maybe people looking after themselves rather than giving the right information. How frustrating is that as a journalist when you're like trying to get to the bottom of what's going on, but you might be wearing in the back of your mind, if this person's looking after his interests or her interests, they may not actually be telling me the truth here?
Yeah, so during a normal week throughout the year, I'll go out and I'll spend some days where I'll go out to meet people, and you build up relationships. So I think for me it probably takes around 6 to 12 to 18 months to really set yourself into a club. I think with Villa, obviously having that first summer was good, and second summer now is even better because you've obviously integrated yourself fully. And I think whoever talks to us realizes that we're not there to annoy anybody. We're not going to just take someone's information firsthand. So if, for example, if an agent did come to me and they told me a set of figures that were really attractive to make this player look good, they'd know that we wouldn't just put it out there. We'd have to verify it. So if they were telling mistruths, we'd quickly be able to tell. So they're good at giving you steers often, but at the same time, we need to verify everything. And yeah, it is frustrating, like you say, but we go through the processes, and sometimes with agents as well, they might tell you generally the best thing, but they won't. Sometimes the figures and everything will be wrong. So that's where you've got to go to different sources. You can't just rely on agents like some journalists do. You've got to speak to maybe is it club sources, is it players, is it themselves, is it the other club or other representatives. So yeah, it's really a convoluted process. It takes a while, but some take longer than others. But I think we've got a reputation now where people realise that we're not trying to fool anybody or try and do anything for clickbait.
I mean, I guess everyone really at the end of the day is trying to do their job as best they can, and there's obviously lots of different facets to that. You're dealing with lots of different people. You've got the club who've got their interest, the players that have got their interest, the agents that have got their interest, the journos. Like it is complicated business. I think people don't realise how much actually goes into transfers and what a minefield is in terms of actually getting to the truth. Sometimes players now as well, they have so many different parties in their ear. They're talking to so many different people. Like it is genuinely really, really difficult. I kind of got a look at behind the scenes in a deal that Villa have done in the last 12 to 18 months, speaking to someone that was involved in that deal. And honestly, I knew they were complicated, but the level of complications that went into the move and negotiations, I couldn't believe it, Jacob.
No, look, I'll give you an example today. We got told, this is Slams Possessive, I got told this morning about 8:30 that Kamaldeen Suleiman is probably going to go to Ajax or go to Benfica. So you spend the whole morning trying to work that out. You then speak to Benfica sources. That can't happen because of Brexit now, the EU regulations. So you then go to Ajax, that's single sourced, and you still try to wait for more information, and by the time you do get that, it's already broken somewhere else, and that's absolutely fine. But you just think, if we did act on a single source, we could have got out there. But at the same time, we weren't 100% sure it was correct. But yeah, like you say, there's so many complexities with transfers, and especially this summer with player trading and everything about PSR. Image rights, making sure everyone's happy, bonuses, how many people are involved, PR teams, agents, intermediaries. It's really, really interesting. I think it would be great if there was a Netflix documentary or something behind the scenes.
Sky did one not that
Fascinating.
long ago. Sky Documentaries did one like a year ago, I think it was, and I honestly don't think they went into the full detail of how complicated they all are. But it was good insight actually looking at that documentary. But I still think it was like there's far more than some of the stuff that was shown. And you've seen it in club documentaries as well. I watched the Burnley documentary recently. The head of transfers at Burnley, God, he was on the verge of a heart attack the whole way through. Like honestly, so it really is tricky business. As I said, we are going to do a timeline and try and go through what happened in Villa's transfer window. But this first bit of the discussion actually would interest me anyway. So we're doing it, and it appears to be interesting people in the chat as well. I've got a question here from David Styles on YouTube. Who's the oddest source you found at a club/in football? I like to think you've tapped up a dinner lady or a car park attendant who feeds you information.
Do you know what? Information can come from anywhere. Genuinely, obviously, you try to speak to the executive, you try to speak to higher ups, the relevant people, but it can generally come from anywhere. I've had examples of fans DMing me saying they've seen this person in the petrol station.
Oh, I get that all the time.
It's always a petrol station as well.
People trying to catch me out, I think, honestly.
But the thing is, though, we'll go through it, and it's a lot of the summer is basically chasing your tail because there's might be a rumor, and then you just try and spend the whole day trying to see if it's if it can be verified, and in most occasions it can't be, but it can be from supporters, security guards. I think a friend of a friend's always a good one as well. It can come from anywhere, and I try to look into every single one.
And sometimes I'll give you information, Jacob, but when I give you information, you still have to get it double sourced on top of me because you don't trust me.
Oh, of course I trust you, Dad. You said about Ross Barkley, but you also said Ndidi as well, didn't you?
Really got misconstrued. But this is the danger. You've got to be clear in what you said. I didn't say Villa were going to sign Ndidi. I said I'd been told there was interest there, but that is the problem with transfers because you said there's interest in players.
Yeah,
Villa are probably interested in 50 players.
Yeah.
But they're only going to sign 4 but they signed more than that. But 4 have ended up being signings that are there going into the new season. That's just the difficulty with it, isn't it? Because the club they hold an interest in so many players.
Yeah, exactly. And look, we had an example of Dendoncker, didn't we? Les Palmas wanted him, but just because it didn't happen doesn't mean it wasn't necessarily true. These things happen. Deadline day in late hours, the Southampton winger Sam Adozi was going to go to Rangers. We reported it. In the end, it didn't happen, but. Yeah, like you say, you can be right, but at the same time, it doesn't always materialise.
Right, so let's do what we've come here to do. Then let's cast our minds back. Villa season's just finished, but obviously there probably would have been moves in motion before that. Would Villa have been waiting to kind of know what competition they were going to be in terms of Europe before they started making plans? Would there have ever been a signing that maybe like Villa maybe wouldn't have made had they not qualified for the Champions League? I think is what I'm trying to say.
I think the players that they wanted was players who they would have got or wanted generally. I think they started. Yeah, I think they started planning from January onwards. Me and Greg wrote a piece in January about FFP or PSR and the complications of how with obviously the Grealish share not covering them now over the 3-year period. But they were planning ahead. I think they looked at the squad and they thought who's the player we can sell that won't have the biggest impact on the departures, and I think it quickly became apparent that Douglas Luiz was, and then that's I think how everything started in terms of how do we replace him, what's our priority position, left back and a number 6, and then they worked from there. I think for them, Ross Barkley was a player that Emery wanted from when Villa played Luton. So when was that? March maybe. Then they can and then they probably had him on their minds for the next few months.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you kind of how early did Villa start making plans, but I guess it never stops, does it? It's a 12-month thing. Was it always going to be Douglas Luiz? Was because he people are, we know that there was a contract on the table. He didn't want to sign it. He had 2 years left. He kind of was exploring where he was at. Was Douglas Luiz? But was it always going to be him, or was there other candidates?
No, in January there was a sense it would be Jacob Ramsey, and that would have solved PSR, homegrown, pure bookable profit. He had interest from elsewhere, Tottenham, Newcastle, Bayern Munich, but I think they spoke to Emery, and I think they saw that Douglas Luiz had 2 years left his contract, unlikely to sign a new one. I think his form as well might have been a concern. Without Kamara, he flatlined, didn't he, in the second half of the season? And they thought, okay, we can see that we don't necessarily need him. He's a fantastic player, but we can probably sign a replacement. And Emery loves Jacob Ramsey, and he sees him as being almost like a new signing. Excuse the cliche this season. So I think heading towards the end of the season, they went for Douglas Luiz to leave, and they quickly made plans immediately after the Palace game to move him on.
Yeah, so he obviously ended up going to Juventus. Villa taking 2 players as part of that deal as well. I guess that was kind of the start of realising this was going to be quite a different transfer market for Villa heading to the end of June, because Villa obviously had to get stuff done. But by June the 30th, we'd also seen, some other kind of loopholes, which we'll come on to get on. But Villa were different players involved at different times in that Juventus deal. But was it always going to be a case of Luiz would be sold and that money would go onto the books? But there was always going to be 1 or 2 Juventus players involved in that as well.
Yeah, but the whole thing took so long, didn't it? Because obviously Douglas Luiz involved in Copa America, and that had to protract negotiations as well. And they had to talk about different players. And I think some fans might not realise is that they just probably look at the Juventus team, and it's not like Football Manager where you think, I want this player. Why don't we get this player for Douglas Luiz? Why are we getting Illing Jr. and Baron Shear? In order to make it work, we'd have to take into account the salaries as well. And these are the young players that they wanted Weston McKennie initially, but when that quickly became apparent that would take a bit longer than June 30, because you've got to remember, Juventus weren't in a rush to sell. They had no PSR issues. Yeah. But with Illing Jr., for example, they thought, okay, he's young now, he's English, he's on a low salary, and he might not be ready now, but if he goes on loan again, we can either integrate him back in the squad fully next year, or we can sell him on for more profit. So really, Villa are only getting 42 million for Douglas Luiz, but if they sell Illing Jr., for example, next year for 20 million, then really that kind of covers the Douglas Luiz, or adds to the Douglas Luiz fee.
Yeah, and he's going to be playing Champions League football next season. Well, this season, albeit it's not at Villa, it's with Bologna, and you're probably going to play against us, which is going to be quite bizarre, having never made an appearance for Villa in terms of the first team, and then suddenly he's lining up against us when technically he's an Aston Villa player. So that's going to be a strange situation. I guess I don't think it would have been a complication with the deal, but I've never actually spoken about it on this channel. I have spoken to people in football about it. The Luiz deal obviously had quite a unique factor to it, that his girlfriend ended up going to Juventus as well. Was that ever something that made the deal more complicated for Villa?
Do you know what? I really don't know, so I can't say. But okay. It does seem, doesn't it, from the outside, that there might have been some negotiation with that. But I think what you got to realise is that Nassef Sarari and Agnelli, the Juve owner, are close. They're on the same board in some capacity. So they've always probably discussed player trading and other things like that. So they've had to. So when negotiations were happening, it was a lot complex, because it was more than just one player. It was 3 players, all their entourages, and Villa had to really say, "Come on, guys, let's get a move on." And you got to remember that probably negotiations started a month before the final signature on June 30, which was obviously the cut-off point. They finally got it. So that's how close it was, and that's how stressful Vidagani and Monchi were in trying to sort that out. And when everyone else was celebrating Champions League, they had it in the back of their mind that we've got to get Douglas Luiz out. He's a fantastic player. He's been brilliant for us, but we have to adhere to PSR, otherwise there could be ramifications.
Yeah, no one wanted a point deduction this season at any point. So look, Luiz had to go. Probably the lesser of two evils, because I would have been really upset. I think Douglas Luiz turned into a fantastic player for Villa. And in fairness, the club needs to once again thank Unai Emery, because the way he developed under Unai Emery compared to where he was at before Unai came in, I don't think Villa he wouldn't have turned into the player he is now without Unai Emery. We've got Rachel Inter-Lewis who says Vidagani and Monchi can go on holiday now. It's probably fair, and
they are going on holiday.
Yeah, they are going on holiday. I think I read that in your piece this morning, actually, on the Athletic. But just talk to us a little bit about how that triangle of power works with Monchi, Vidagani, and Emery.
Yeah, so it was quite funny the other day in the press conference. Emery doesn't really associate himself or get involved in PSR. I think he has, a good understanding, but it's not like he gets hung up on the specifics of it. Vidagani and Monchi are the ones that their ultimate job, overarching job, is to placate and to pacify Emery. They need to give him the squad that he wants. Emery will obviously be involved with discussions. He wanted Barkley, Maatsen, Onana, Rodgers. But Vidagani and Monchi have to take care of the financial side of things, have to really immerse themselves in salaries, amortization, all the little complexities. So Emery can just fully focus on tactics and on the first team. Those two, they know Emery so well, don't they? They know what Emery wants.
Oh, I thought you were going to carry on then.
No, sorry.
No, it's okay. Obviously we know all about Monchi, but his role is a bit more defined. We know what Monchi does, although his job title is never what I expected to be, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But I think it's Vidagani who's classed as a director of football at Aston Villa, isn't he? But not in the traditional sense, in that he's not. Monchi would usually be specified as the director of football, but Villa have got all these different job titles going around. Vidagani, everything I hear from everyone I talk to at Villa and outside football, everyone's always very, very impressed with Vidagani and talks about how important he is for Aston Villa and how important he is for Emery. Can you just give us a little bit of insight into how he works?
Yeah, we obviously did an interview with him last year, and he was really good at getting an insight into what he does. But his jobs are multiple, really. He came over as a personal assistant to Emery. Obviously, Emery didn't feel comfortable from his first time in England. On his own, really, he felt that a duck out of water, or a fish out of water, even. New metaphor. But then, obviously, Vidagani comes in. He goes to every press conference as a translator again. He basically is the conduit between the dressing room and Emery's coaching staff. Every agent speaks to him, whether they want a new signing or they want what their player wants to leave. He talks to the English staff. He's the conduit between the Spanish-speaking staff and the existing English staff. He carries out basically all the things that Emery wants him to do. So if a player's not happy, there was one example last year about a good player, not having enough game time. And Vidagani was the one that approached that player and said, listen, it'll come, etc. Where, Emery's obviously well liked, but he's not always the most personable with his players. He just wants to focus on football. Vidagani will do that job. He will also then be the guy that makes the negotiations for the new contracts, builds relationships. Every person that I've spoken to in Villa, outside of Villa, at other clubs, agents, they all have really good things to say about Vidagani. And I've interviewed him a few times. He's one of the most engaging speakers. Goes on for a good long while, but very confident, very loud. And I probably argue, apart from Emery, he's the most important cog in that wheel.
So, because I imagine, is Monchi more involved in terms of the identification and looking at whether the player's the right fit, but then he won't be so heavily involved in terms of negotiations, salaries? Is Vidagani more involved in that?
They both get involved, but Vidagani's the one that knows all the conditions, all the parameters, what they can, what they can't do.
Yeah.
He's there basically to be the facilitator for everything. He's obviously not a talent spotter. He's a journalist. He as a kid growing up, he preferred basketball rather than football. His job is not to sign the players or identify the players. His job is to get all the paperwork done to finalise that. If Emery or Monchi say, right, I want this player, so I want Morgan Rodgers, Vidagani will go and talk to the agent throughout negotiations. Those negotiations took ages, but Vidagani would always be the first point of call, and it would allow Monchi then to go away and identify other targets. So yeah, I'm sure he's probably got multiple phones. His phone never stops ringing, but he's there as trusted lieutenant of Emery. He follows him everywhere. And if you could have two Vidaganis, I think the job would be a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, you referenced Emery really wanted Morgan Rodgers there. Emery also really wanted Ross Barkley. It was a signing that Emery pushed for. Talk to us about that deal, because I kind of get the sense that even if Luiz had stayed, perhaps Barkley would have always come in anyway.
Yeah, he loved Barkley. A similar case, like I say, to Morgan Rodgers, in terms of he played against him and was, and watched the analysis pre and post that got those games, and he stood out to him in terms of being at number 6 who can play forward in between the lines. And I don't think it really mattered that he'd been at Villa before, because he was a completely different player. Emery saw him as a completely different player, and given the conditions of his time at Luton, where he was available for a really low cost, it wouldn't really affect PSR anyway. So I think that helps as well. And there's some players that Monchi will identify, or the scouting team, so Costa and Nedeljkovic, for example, and there's some players that Emery will say, right, this I really want him, and Vidagani and Monchi will do everything they can to get him, and Barkley's one, Morgan Rogers was one, Conor Gallagher was one, obviously they couldn't get that done, and whatever Emery wants, usually Villa will try and get.
Yeah, I mean, Barkley is homegrown as well, which obviously helps
Yeah.
in terms of registering players for the Champions League. Villa needed to be mindful of European squad registration, just like they did last season with the Conference League. Villa obviously signed Ian Maatsen from Chelsea. It took us a little bit by surprise. It took me by surprise anyway, initially when that deal kind of first got an hand. It happened quite quickly as well. Again, it had to, because clubs are battling with PSR. I include Chelsea in that. Villa, obviously, Emery identified or wanted Maatsen, or the club identified him as someone that could help Villa down the left-hand side. But it soon became apparent that to get that done, someone needed to be sold to Chelsea. Well, kind of both clubs wanted that. It was the same with Irabunam and Dobbin, which, to be honest, looking at what's happened with Dobbin, that feels like a pure PSR signing at the moment. But that Maatsen and Kellyman deal, Villa didn't really want to lose Kellyman, did they? But Chelsea, they've got that transfer sphere going on where they're trying to sign young talent that maybe aren't first team ready now, but might be in a few years, and they see what happens with those players. Kellyman became kind of the one Chelsea wanted, didn't he? Rather than one that Villa wanted to lose. So if Villa wanted Maatsen, Kellyman had to be involved.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, left back was a priority from the start of the summer, really. They wanted a different profile of left back. They wanted someone a bit more attacking. It was always more likely that Alex Moreno would leave, so they probably need someone more similar to him than Luca Dean. But another spanner in the works was that Borussia Dortmund had the buy option on Maatsen. So Villa had to, obviously, they'd had a small condensed window of opportunity to get Maatsen because of June 30, but they had to wait first for Dortmund to either activate or forget the buy option. And then once, obviously, they prayed that Dortmund didn't, they would go all in for him, and then Chelsea then would have to, who would they want to sign from Villa? There's obviously talk of John Duran, but like you say, the fit was Omari Kellam. They really liked him. They like young players on low salaries initially, on big contracts. And he fitted. It cut really deep because I think Emery really liked him. They thought he was a really nice kid, good kid from the local area, nice family. But the money that Chelsea were offering, and they had to accept to make the Maatsen deal work, is probably the one that Villa, it really hurt Villa of all the departures, and I would include Douglas Luiz in that.
Yeah, interesting, because we haven't really seen much of Kellyman.
He's injured again, isn't he? Hamstring.
Yeah, he's got injuries. He's announced on his Instagram, I think, that he's injured. He come from Derby, didn't he? A young age. Kellyman, very, very highly rated, but warning to him, I guess, because Chukwuemeka at the moment is a bit in no man's land. He didn't get a move, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, and he's a bit kind of stuck at Chelsea now and not gonna play. It'll be interesting to see how Kellyman develops. Let's talk about two incomings then in this window. I'll start with Onana. Villa, you've mentioned Conor Gallagher already. I'm assuming they couldn't have ever got both. We were living in a world where Villa could never have got both. But it feels like initially Gallagher was the main target, maybe because he was more attainable for cheaper. But it's turned out Onana's been a brilliant fit.
Yeah, I think they've liked Onana for a while. I know Villa have been linked to Onana for a good few months before it actually happened. But then it went a little bit quiet. I think they probably had, like every other signing, they probably inquired. They probably got a sense of how much it would cost to sign Onana or other players, and probably the first fee wasn't very attractive to them. But then obviously they had to wait a few weeks. Gallagher didn't happen, and then I think they got back to the negotiation table, and Onana, I think it quickly became apparent once Onana wanted to come to Aston Villa. I know there's been reports that he rejected other clubs, big clubs as well, to join Villa because he was so enamoured by Emery. I think that really pushed Villa to do the deal, and also Everton had their own financial issues, right? They had to probably sell someone to bring a couple of players in, like a Mangala they signed towards the end of the window, and they knew that Onana wanted to leave. Sean Dyche would get the best out of him, and the asking price got lowered in the end.
Yeah, I mean, we're already saying what a brilliant addition.
Yeah,
he's been to Villa. He's been brilliant across the three games. A real different type of midfielder to what Villa have had before. And this is the bit I find fascinating because I'm sure there's some similarities in Gallagher and Onana, but not too many. But it's almost like it doesn't matter that they're different types of players. Usually you'd say, like Manchester United signing a player, sometimes they go from one to the next, and I think they just don't know what they're doing. It makes no sense to go from that player to this player. They're completely different, and I think that all the time. But from Villa's point of view, with Emery, because he's such a good coach, and he's probably in his mind maybe got 5 or 6 different ways of thinking how Villa might play in that season, and it all depends on the incomings. It's not scattergun when it's Villa, because had they got Gallagher in, I've no doubt that Villa would have probably started the season in exactly the same way as they have done, playing in a slightly different way to they have done. Now they've got Onana. That's the bit I find really interesting about Emery and Villa, is that it almost doesn't matter what type of player he is, if that makes sense. Does that make sense what I've just said?
Yeah, it does, and that's one of Emery's great qualities. He can just adapt but still maintain a great structure. And I think I wrote in my piece this morning that the great thing about Onana is that he had obviously the mentality, the courage to be in Emery central midfielder, but he can play without Kamara as the lone 6, next to a Tillemans, for example. But then when Kamara comes back, and like we saw in the second half against Arsenal, he can be the more advanced midfielder, and he can really get into the box, push into the box, and score goals as well. So he can play as a number 6 and number 8, and he can play with any combination, whether it's a Tillemans, Barkley, or Kamara. And yeah, he's young as well. I think we referenced a few weeks ago, Dan, that against West Ham there were 7 players aged 23 or under that finished the game, and obviously Onana, similar to Gallagher, they fit that youthful profile.
Yeah, like I say, Onana's been absolutely brilliant. It was brilliant again against Leicester. Hopefully that injury obviously came off in the end isn't too bad. Let's talk about one of the more complicated deals of the window. Then I've spoken to other journalists who've said, I have never reported on a transfer like this one. Phillippe Genus coming back to Villa. We got not caught out, but we would. I don't think we're hearing is that he doesn't want to go, doesn't think he's going to get first team football. I think we even did a podcast, and then after we finished the podcast saying what I've just said, it was then like, yeah, Phillippe Genus are coming to Villa. Is that, we talked about nightmares for journalists. That must be a deal that was up there as being a nightmare.
Yeah, because different briefings from different people, so many people involved in this one, and it was literally changing all the time because there were so many clubs involved. I was getting calls from January, about Phillippe Genus being of interest to clubs in Spain, in Turkey, in top 6 in the Premier League. None of them included Villa. And Crystal Palace came in, Ipswich came in. They were all making different deals, doing different deals. But Villa, obviously, they couldn't do anything until one team actually put an official bid in, and then they could therefore activate the matching clause. I think for Phillippe Genus as well, it was really important that Emery really liked him. He liked him. He thought he made a mistake, but they had to obviously sell him last year. That he was also qualified as a club trained player, which was so important for the Champions League this term. So that helped in their desire to signing, but that was so complicated because it was changing. A briefing that he wanted to go to Ipswich. Oh wait, he doesn't want to go to Ipswich. He wants to go to Crystal Palace, but Villa are there. He won't get the game time at Villa, but then Emery has spoken to him and promises that he will get the game time. It was all up in the air. But Villa had the cards, I guess, because they had that matching clause.
And also, just the deal was cheaper for Villa than it would have been for anyone else as well, which of course is attractive in terms of, even if it wasn't to work out this time and Villa sell him on, they're going to make a profit.
Yeah, you'd hope so as well, and you just hope that he does get that game time in the next, maybe in the next few weeks with Leon Bailey's injury, but providing he's fit as well. I think he's a really good talent, and I think for him the next step was maybe that bridge between Hull and Villa, maybe that like an Ipswich or something in the Premier League where he gets a good 30 games or something in the top flight this season, and then go to Villa or back to Villa. But obviously Villa's the way they laid the package last year meant it's probably the best of time to get him now. So yeah, like you say about Emery being a great coach, it's going to be so fascinating to see how he develops Phillippe Genus in the next year or so.
Yeah, because there's always good players to pick up from the Championship. I'm convinced about that. We've seen many teams do it in the past, and he did very, very well in the Championship. And when you come into work under Emery as well, you're probably going to get to a level or two above where maybe people expect. It's actually I think it's an exciting signing for Phillippe Genus. He's one I'm really interested to see how he does.
Yeah, because Villa haven't got that many out and out wingers, have they? Really, Leon Bailey maybe, but Phillippe Genus like that. He's quick, he's direct. He's some of the goals he scored last year for Hull with the back heels, audacious. He's confident, and I think he can be really, really dangerous. When Villa play these games in Europe, maybe in the Carabao Cup, against low blocks. I think Phillippe Genus, you might see the best of him because he's he's an excellent 1v1 dribbler, and yeah, like you say, he can play left wing, right wing, number 10 sometimes as well. So I'm excited to see him, and I think I put my piece today that he's my hopeful surprise package because I think he's a really talented player, and he's quiet, but I'm sure Emery can bring him out of shell.
Yeah, I saw that you put him as your surprise package in your Athletic article this morning reviewing Villa's transfer window. A sale that probably wasn't planned. I don't think Villa went into the summer thinking Bobby's going to go this summer, but it was one that ended up sensing kind of an opportunity to make a little bit of a profit on a player that wasn't going to be in Emery's first 11. When everyone's fit, I don't think he wasn't really fitting into what Emery wanted in that second half of the season at all. Moussa Diaby, he was a little bit unhappy himself, wasn't he? With the amount of football that he was getting. Saudi hadn't really been very active at that point in the window either. Actually, that was one of those rare things that wasn't probably planned, but for Villa, they felt like they couldn't not do it in the end. It was almost more risky not to sell him.
Yeah, it was odd though, wasn't it? Like you say, I wasn't expecting him to leave. I think he always felt like his first year in the Premier League, next year he'll be better for it. But then, as soon as the interest from Saudi came, you suddenly thought, that makes perfect sense really for him to go. Obviously, Villa Ghani, I know he's mentioned publicly about how the Diaby sales help with PSR from UEFA squad cost ratios, things like that. PSR as well. I think it was really good, substantial profit they got on him, 60 million euros or whatever. And also, what you realise is that Morgan Rogers I think the plan was for Morgan Rogers to move centrally into that, Diaby position almost, and that left number 10 being either McGinn or Jacob Ramsey. So, Villa would have loved João Felix, who we might come on to, but at the same time, you had Rogers who could play just off Watkins, and that's exactly what Diaby was doing. Diaby and Rogers, their role was to be that ball carrier between the lines. And if you can sell Diaby, that made perfect sense. Like you say, he was keen on the move. He said to Emery, please let me go. And I don't think it's too much. It's not too complicated apart from that, really. I think it's a good deal for Villa. It's quite sad, really, that a player of Diaby's quality is going over there so early on in his career, but maybe he'll come back to Europe at some point.
Yeah, I think Diaby and Ivan Toney going over there, they're kind of the first players that are really at the lot. They're probably at their best age in terms of football, and they're going over there whilst they've still got a lot to offer in one of the top 5 leagues, I would say. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on, because I think those two going over there is quite interesting. Let's talk about Cameron Archer. Then he came back, scored goals in pre-season. We know that Villa had to take him back because that was the terms of the deal that was agreed when he went to Sheffield United permanently. Was there ever any chance that he was going to stay at any point? Obviously, John Duran's future was up in the air the entirety of the summer transfer window. Was there ever a world where if Duran had left, Archer would have stayed?
I think they might have kept Cameron Archer as a safety blanket, but I don't think he was ever part of the long-term plans. They would have only kept him really if Duran had gone and they couldn't sign anyone else. But, even with how they announced Archer's return, it was very low-key. I think he did really well pre-season. That's a massive credit.
Such a good finisher.
Yeah, he's got good pace. Well, goes out, runs away from the ball, which is what Villa and Emery wants for his number 9 at points. I think he had a really good pre-season, and I think they got fantastic money for him, to be honest with you. 15 million plus, add-ons from Southampton's great. And he's obviously pure bookable profit as well. So that's points. Obviously, it's not great. They didn't receive the full fee from Sheffield United, and they had another challenge, I guess, in having to sell him again. But I think it's a good deal all around. Archer goes to Southampton and hopefully scores a few goals there as well. But yeah, he was never part of the long-term plans. I think that was quite evident from even 12 months ago.
And generally, Villa have had a difficult time trying to move players on this window. Can we just talk around some of the players that Villa perhaps wanted to move on but struggled to? Moreno, in an ideal world, I'm sure he would have gone out permanently, but he's gone out on loan to Forest, which is a decent loan move for him. It's a shame. I think his career could have turned out differently at Villa had he not had that really bad injury that he picked up at the end of the season previous to last. But obviously Villa struggled to move people on, which has had a knock-on effect in terms of getting maybe 1 or 2 more in.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the Dendoncker deal as well took a while, didn't it? It's only happened yesterday. But yeah, I think the left back situation was always the issue. It was either going to be Moreno or Luca Dean. I think there's probably more of a market for Moreno because of his wages, are less, but also Nottingham Forest have liked him for 2 years, even before he came to Villa. And I'd hoped that hopefully he gets back to his best. And maybe, who knows, if he has a really good year on loan and Villa think, we need to sell Luka Dean now this time, because of his wage, etc. Maybe he comes back and plays as a deputy to Maatsen, who should be, first choice. I'd like to think. So it's not out the question that he comes back, but they did eventually move him on. I think the only player you probably say maybe things could have been different is Diego Carlos. I think if they got him out, they would have strengthened certainly at centre back, and maybe signed 2 players. But his injuries, Fulham not going for him in the end, interest never materialising from Saudi Arabia meant, it's always been difficult for him to leave.
Do you think he'll play as much as he did last season, or be in the squad as much as last season? Obviously, he's injured again at the moment. But the way Emery's operate, I can't say that just because he hasn't gone, he's never going to be on the pitch again. He'll still play games, won't he?
Yeah, I would have been surprised if he played, against Leicester if he wasn't injured, because Cash was injured. Maybe I know Emery doesn't want to use Conte right back, but it's a pretty safe bet to use him right back and Carlos at centre back over Bogard or Nedeljkovic. I think he'll play maybe not as often as last year, because you hope that fingers crossed that the fitness of Mings, Powell, Conte is better this time around. But he will still play a point, and he's on a big wage. They need to make the use most of him, and they need to make him attractive, I guess, to sell him on maybe in January or the summer as well. But you just hope he stops getting these niggles. He gets so many, doesn't he? Just little ones keep him up for 1 or 2 weeks, and it completely disrupts Emery's plans, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a difficult one with Diego, because I think, again, loud motorbike there going past my house. Diego Carlos, again, injury, lost a yard of pace from that injury. One of his best skills was his pace, and that's probably not there as obviously as it was previously. Injuries at times just absolutely kill players. I think one question that Villa fans would have, and it's kind of 2 things there to this, what I'm about to ask you. Villa didn't plan to sell Diaby, so when Villa were looking around PSR here, Diaby probably wasn't part of that, but then he's ended up going. So people will probably want to know, well, why then could we not have more wiggle room to bring players in, because we didn't plan for the Diaby sale? Do you know much about that?
All I know is what Vidagani said on TalkSport, is that Diaby would have helped, help comply with the UEFA squad rule costs as well, because it's only one thing managing PSR, but it's also with Diaby and UEFA competitions as well. So that was just another headache for them to factor in as well. I think wriggle room was so tight that even though it wasn't ruled out that they would do something on a deadline day, I spoke to agents who their clients were involved in transfers, and they got told that their future might be affected providing Villa can sign someone. So it wasn't ruled out that they would try and do a loan or something on the final day, but there was just such a small room for them to do anything. And even if they tried to shift Dendoncker, Diego Carlos, they couldn't really sign anyone that was massive. Obviously, they tried for Gertruda, but that was always felt like it's going to be ambitious. But I think they were so tight on everything, and also the salaries as well of new contract for Emi Martinez, Watkins, Bailey, Conte as well in the last couple of months as well that has to be factored in as well in terms of how the squad overall costs and planning.
Yeah, I mean, João Felix probably fits into the Diaby thing, because you thought, well, if Diaby had been played a lot of football at number 10, he's going, Felix perhaps could come in as a more ideal number 10. We know Emery really likes him and would have really wanted him. But if we're not bringing people in at the end of the window like we didn't, how were we ever going to afford João Felix?
But that's why it took so long, and that's why it ultimately didn't get done, because Villa, obviously, they first had to convince the player, but at the same time, they had to work out this financial package that would work, and obviously, they couldn't offer the salary or buy him permanently that Chelsea could. So they had to try and find an arrangement for Atletico, and that's why it took so long, because they just ultimately couldn't come to one. And that is the issue at the end of the day.
Were we ever close?
I haven't got the information, but all is that they just kept having talks. They kept trying to push through this wall almost, but as soon as Chelsea came involved, they blew Villa out of the water, didn't it?
Yeah, because I've heard stories about some ridiculous contract demands if Felix was to come to Villa, even stuff around a gold Nando or a black Nando's card, whatever that is.
Would be a good story.
Living in London, needing to live in London, days off in the week. I mean, I don't know how true any of that stuff is, but you just hear some ridiculous stuff around transfers. Sometimes it was always going to be a push. I actually did think at one point Villa might be able to do it, but I think at the time I didn't think Villa were as tight as they are, and I hadn't personally factored in the UEFA regulations, which are just another added difficulty for Villa on top of PSR. And anyway, I'm sure we know that, and we've said this on other shows, that in an ideal world, Villa would have signed one or two more. They would have loved to. Everyone at the club who works in transfers, works at the club, would have loved that, but they just couldn't do it. And I think that's where the frustration lies now with these rules. I don't want to drop Birmingham City in it here. They're in League One and they've just spent £15 million on a striker because the rules are really, really loose.
Yeah.
These rules have absolutely killed Villa, which isn't right because Villa have done so well to qualify for the top four and qualify for the Champions League. Now they've got there. It's not fair that they can't really compete with the teams that are in there because of these stupid financial rules. And there's a lot of frustration at the club around that, isn't there, Jacob?
Yeah, there is, and it's weird because in some ways they've broke the ceiling and qualified for the top four, but still they're limited by a certain ceiling because they haven't got the revenues of a top six club. They haven't got the revenues of even a West Ham, but they have got owners that are willing to spend, that want to spend, but they're being punished because the top six, because of their success in the 1980s, 1990s, and which meant that they've become a successful club and they've coincided with the boom of the Premier League. They've been able to capitalise on that. Meanwhile, Villa have been starting from further back in the field, and it is awful. And in some ways, they're hamstrung by being in the Premier League, but also being in UEFA competitions because they have to have a certain amount of club trained players in Champions League. But at the same time, PSR incentivizes them to sell their club trained players. So they can only. There's the contradictions between UEFA and Premier League needs to be looked at, and I think it is being looked at in terms of PSR.
It could be too late for us then, couldn't it? We might not qualify for the Champions League this season, so if they suddenly change the rules next season, that's in a way even more frustrating.
Exactly, and revenue as well is a key thing, but revenue takes time to grow. Stadium. If say the stadium redevelopment did happen in May, it would take long because they've got to build it. They've then got to put the seats in, the cost of that, and then they will only really benefit the fruits of a bigger gate in years' time. And who's to say that in a couple of years' time Villa are even in the Champions League or in the top six? So I think, and they really didn't want to play with 3 stands in a Champions League year as well. So yeah, it's in some ways Champions League, if you're being ultra critical, has come at an unlucky time for Villa, but it's just the contradiction of PSR which I think really infuriates them and limits their ceiling of how much they can spend.
Yeah, this is a good question here from Sai AVFC. I take it Gauchi is now Amy's understudy. Does that mean we get shot of Olsen in January? I think Olsen's injured.
He's always injured for a player that doesn't play much.
He's injured at the moment, isn't he? I think at the start of the window, I'd have been worried about the goalkeeping position. Were Villa ever in the market for a low cost backup goalkeeper? Are they going to go with what obviously they are going to go with what they've got because that's what's there. But were they always going to do that? Is what I'm asking.
Genuinely, from having no discussions about this, I just thought they would do a goalkeeper and they'd allow Robin Olsen to move on in this point of his career, be a first choice keeper at somewhere, albeit it might not be at the Premier League level or anywhere near, but just somewhere. And I'm surprised they have it, and I think that's a real big worry because if Emi Martinez got injured tomorrow, I don't think you'd be very, heaven forbid, but you would just not want, you wouldn't feel comfortable in Olsen or Gauchi, and that's nothing, no slight on them, but they're not Emi Martinez. So I did expect them to sign a goalkeeper. I wouldn't be surprised if Robin Olsen's still number 2. Emery really does like him a lot. He likes his character. He likes the way he trains when he's fit. And Gauchi's young and inexperienced, so I'd probably say that Robin Olsen's still ahead of him in pecking order. But if Olsen's fit for the Wickham game, it'd be interesting to see who plays that one.
It'd be interesting to see Joe Gauchi anyway, even if Olsen was fit, give him a game. Otherwise, he's just never going to play. You would think, give him a Carabao Cup tie for sure. Just away from not the Villa's main transfer sphere, they've got this kind of youth strategy going on. I suppose most clubs will have it nowadays. They have made a couple of signings in terms of players for the future, which is something they've done well probably for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, they haven't. But also, I think that's a factor in because they're in the Champions League. They're playing in this UEFA Youth League now, which means they take it very seriously. They need to play. They need to sign players or have players to be in this competition, to be competitive in them. But at the same time, you got to think which players or identify which players would be better served going on loan as well. So yeah. It's been a very juggling act, I guess, how you can describe this summer.
Yeah. So what are some of them? What are you? If you give it a mark out of 10 for what they've done this transfer window, that it feels like it's gone on forever. What mark would you give Villa?
Genuinely, I think with all the challenges they faced, I have to factor that in. So I'd say a solid 7, maybe probably even higher. Maybe I think if you did have PSR and you just looked at this recruitment, you'd probably say there's a few drawbacks. Light in defence, no real backup for Martinez, but with everything that's gone on and the logistical and just the complications they've had, I think they've done well to get that extra squad depth.
Yeah, because that triangle of power, Emery, Monchi, Vidagani, they're good people. Like, you have to trust them. We're in the position that we're in because of those people and the players, obviously, as well, and the rest of the coaching staff. But there has to be an element of trust there, doesn't there? Even if you're slightly, as a Villa fan, underwhelmed by the transfer window, which I don't think is the club's fault at all, as you've just explained, you have to trust that what you've got there will get the maximum out of the club again, like they have done ever since they came in.
But also, as well, when they came in, they had a lot of players that were signed to be in Aston Villa as a top 10, top 14 club, really, between that area. So they had to move out all these players, Danny Ings, for example, Nakamba. They had to, Keenan Davis. They had to focus on all those players. And then they had to evolve the squad. And it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect in 2, 3, 4 windows. But eventually they're getting closer. And I think they are getting closer. But I think it's been a solid window. And like you say, you've got to trust them because I think they're really good recruiters. I think they've done well, extraordinarily well in maximising the players' talent, haven't they? In terms of Morgan Rogers started 15 million, raised eyebrows. Now, what is he worth? So, I think you've just got to trust them.
Yeah, Morgan Rogers is the prime example of what Villa have done really, really well.
Yeah,
over the last year and a half, and what Emery's done really well over the last year and a half. Right then, thank you, Jacob. I think that does us. I think we've pretty much reviewed everything there. I know we have missed a couple of things out. I think they were the person. Was it maybe Coutinho was the only one I didn't write down? Maybe because Villa had to rip up his contract. Essentially, they've still had to pay those wages out. So it's not like there's a real saving there, is there? Because they've still had to pay him.
No, but he's one of those that I would put into the list of of Danny Ings and Nakamba in terms of players that aren't just at the level anymore to perform, and they've wanted to get rid of him, but unlike the other guys, he's on such a huge wage and no one is prepared to pay it. So they've got to still pay some of his wage, which I'm sure is annoying, but they'd rather get him off the books in some respect, lower the fees, but it's just the issue is that he was just got signed on a long-term contract for a guy that's injury prone. It's not at the same level, and they're basically inheriting the challenges that the previous regime faced, and it's not their fault.
I tried to say that yesterday with Greg, but he wasn't really having it. He was very, very on level field, Greg. He doesn't like to jump around and criticise, which is fair. That's his style. We've all got our styles, I guess. Right, that does do us now. Now I've asked the Coutinho question. Jacob, thank you for joining me and just going through that. I think hopefully people will find that interesting. I've said before, I'm trying to do things in a slightly different way on this channel because there is so many Villa podcasts and so much content out there. But I did think that you'd be able to give a unique insight into how Villa's transfer window has worked behind the scenes. And I think, to be fair, you fulfilled the brief. Have you got anything exciting coming up on the Athletic in terms of stories?
So we've got an interview regarding this really. With some of the senior guys of Villa coming out late tomorrow night, so don't go to bed until past 10:30. I'd say.
10, that's the late release.
The embargoes, but yeah, that's coming out, and there's a lot more coming out on the international break, which should be very, very interesting. I've got obviously pieces that I've been working on for a long time, and the international break with no football is a great time to release it.
Well, I look forward to it all. Jacob, the content won't stop here on 1874 this week. There's going to be another show on Thursday with Conor Harahan. He's going to take a break from all his coaching and playing, although he hasn't really been playing. But I spoke to him today, actually. I didn't realise he's fully doing the coaching at the moment. He's registered, but the plan is not really that he's going to play at Barnsley. So I'll talk to him about that on Thursday. And also I've asked for your questions for Conor on X, as it's now known. So yeah, if you want to ask Conor anything, get in touch with me somehow. I'm everywhere on social media. So yeah, get in touch with me and I'll try my best to ask the questions to Conor. We're planning to go live Thursday, 6 p.m. So you will also be able to ask him questions in the chat as well, which I'm sure will make it a very, very fun show. Go back and watch the show that Greg and I did yesterday, of course, the stereotypical podcast that we do once a week. We look back over the Leicester game and spoke about some other things as well. We went a lot longer yesterday than I thought we were going to. So yeah, we got a lot of ground covered. Greg and myself trying to get more content out there on the channel. I really want to push this season and really get more content out there, especially with it being a Champions League season as well. So if you are enjoying the stuff, tell everyone that you know there's a Villa fan about it, and do all the things that I bang on about every single show, like subscribing, liking, leaving reviews on audio platforms. But the main one is subscribing with your post notifications on YouTube and leaving reviews on the audio platforms. That's all really, really helpful stuff for us. And what also helps us is our sponsors, Luke Roper. If you want to get 20% off everything that they have to offer, then use the code TVV20 and get yourself some Luke gear. We get a little kickback from that, which helps with running the channel. So yeah, if you could please buy yourself some Luke gear and use our code, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you to Lee for producing on a great run at the moment, Lee, on the producing front. No mistakes. Keep it up, please, Lee. If not, you'll have words from me when I sit next to you at Villa Park. Have a great rest of your evening. Hopefully Monday hasn't been too bad for you. Is it even Monday today? Yes, it is. Hopefully Monday hasn't been that bad for you. And as always, up the Villa.